In this video lesson, we'll explore the impact of the KansasNebraska Act on the tensions as we move closer to civil war. Railroad promoters, both north and south, had projected many drawing board routes to the Pacific coast, but the estimated cost in all cases was so great that for many years there could only be one line, should its terminus be in the north or in the south. The favored section would reap rich rewards in wealth, population, and influence. The South, losing the economic race to the North, was eager to extend a railroad through adjacent southwestern territory all the way to California. Another chunk of Mexico now seemed desirable because the campaigns of the recent war had shown that the best railroad route ran slightly south of the Mexican border. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, a Mississippian, arranged to have James Gadsden, a prominent South Carolina railroad man, appointed minister to Mexico. Finding Santa Anna in power for the sixth and last time, and as usually in need of money, Gadsden made gratifying headway and negotiated a treaty in 1853. He negotiates the Gadsden Purchase, which you can see here in green, finishing off the border between the United States and Mexico. The Gadsden Purchase area was ceded to the U.S. in 1853 for $10 million. The transaction aroused much criticism among Northerners who objected to paying a huge sum for a cactus-strewn desert nearly the size of South Carolina. The coveted railroad enabled the South to claim the coveted railroad with great insistence. A southern track would be easier to build because the mountains were less high and because the route would not pass through unorganized territory. Any northern or central railroad would have to be thrust through unorganized territory of Nebraska, where the buffalo and the Indians roamed. Northern railroad boosters quickly replied that if organized territory were the test, then Nebraska should be organized. Such a move was not premature, because thousands of land-hungry pioneers were already poised on the Nebraska border. But all schemes proposed in Congress for organizing the territory were greeted with apathy or hostility by Southerners. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas of Illinois delivered a counterstroke to offset the Gadsden thrust for Southern expansion westward into the United States. This little giant radiated the energy and breezy optimism of a self-made man. An ardent booster for the West, he longed to break the north-south deadlock over westward expansion and stretch a line of settlements across the continent. A steam engine in breeches, Douglas threw himself behind a legislative scheme that would enlist the support of a reluctant South. The proposed territory of Nebraska would be sliced into two territories, Kansas and Nebraska. Their status regarding slavery would be settled by popular sovereignty, a democratic concept to which Douglas and his Western constituents were deeply attached. Kansas, west of slaveholding Missouri, would presumably choose to become a slave state, but Nebraska, west of Free Soil, Iowa, would presumably become a free state. Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska scheme ran into a formidable political obstacle. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had forbidden slavery and proposed Nebraska Territory, which lay north of the sacred 3630 parallel, and the only way to open the region would be to repeal it. This bold step Douglas was prepared to take, even at the risk of shattering the uneasy truce patched together by the Compromise of 1850. Many Southerners who had not conceived of Kansas as slave soil rose to the bait. Here was the chance to gain one more slave state. President Pierce supported it. But the Missouri Compromise could not be brushed aside lightly. Whatever Congress passes, it can repeal, but by this time the North had come to regard the Sectional Pact as almost as sacred as the institution of the Constitution itself, and the free-soiled members will strike back. Free Soilers met their match in Stephen Douglas, who was the ablest rough-and-tumble debater of his generation. He rammed the bill through Congress with strong support from many Southerners. Political passions were so heated that there was bloodshed. Douglas's motives in prodding anew the snarling dog of slavery have puzzled historians. His foes have accused him of angling for presidency in 1856, yet his admirers had argued plausibly in his defense that if he had not championed the bill, someone would have. Douglas acted somewhat impulsively and recklessly. He declared repeatedly that he did not care whether it was voted up or down by the territories. What he failed to perceive was that hundreds of thousands of his federal citizens in the North did feel deeply on this moral issue, and that repeal of the Missouri Compromise created a breach in faith. Genuine leaders must foresee the possible effects of their motives and moves. Douglas predicted a hell of a storm, but he grossly underestimated its proportions. Though he had critics in the North, he still enjoyed a high degree of popularity among his following in the Democratic Party, especially in Illinois, which was a stronghold of popular sovereignty. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was one of the most momentous measures ever to pass Congress. By one way of reckoning, it greased the slippery slope to the Civil War. Anti-slavery Northerners were angered by what they condemned as an act of bad faith. All future compromise with the South would be immeasurably more difficult. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, preciously enforced in the North only half-heartedly, was a dead letter. The Kansas-Nebraska Act wrecked two compromises, that of 1820, which it repealed specifically, and that of 1850, which Northern opinion repealed indirectly. The growing legion of anti-slaveryites gained numerous recruits who resented the grasping move by the slaveocracy for Kansas, and Free Soilers tried to control Kansas. The proud Democrats were shattered by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They did elect a president in 1856, but he was the last they were to boost into the White House for 28 years as a result. The most durable offspring of the Kansas-Nebraska blunder was the new Republican Party. It sprang up spontaneously in the Middle West, notably in Wisconsin and Michigan, as a mighty moral protest against the gains of slavery. It soon included disgruntled Whigs, Democrats, Free Soilers, Know-Nothings, and other foes of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The hodgepodge party spread eastward with the swiftness of a prairie fire and the zeal of a religious crusade. At the beginning of 1854, it elected a Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives within 2 years. Never really a third-party movement, it erupted with such force as to become overnight the second major political party, on sectional grounds. The new Republican Party would not be allowed south of the Mason-Dixon line. And we'll discuss more about the creation of the Republican Party and the impact of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in our lessons in class.